Living expenses? What does that entail? My mother-in-law's expression reflected genuine confusion. Hey, Brian, can you explain this properly? I pressed, watching my husband squirm. Brian, caught between his mother and me, seemed to shrink under the pressure. I've never received anything like that before, he finally admitted. Let me introduce myself. I'm Carol, a 37-year-old office worker happily married to Brian. Our whirlwind romance led us to tie the knot within 4 months of meeting each other. Our families were thrilled, especially given our ages. Since our marriage, my relationship with my mother-in-law had blossomed. We often dined out and grew quite close. Initially, Brian and I lived separately but nearby. However, after Brian's father passed away, we decided to live together. Contrary to stereotypes, there was no tension with my mother-in-law. She willingly took on household chores, giving me time to focus on work. I felt guilty but appreciated her help. To show my gratitude, I provided her with some living expenses through Brian. Yet as Brian's appetite grew, I worried about whether our budget was sufficient. So, I broached the topic with him, suggesting we increase the allowance for his mother. I think we should increase the living expenses we give to your mom, I said, especially considering how much you've been eating lately and she's been doing all the cooking and cleaning. Brian seemed hesitant but eventually agreed, sharing my sentiment about showing appreciation tangibly. As I nodded in approval, little did I know that life was about to take an unexpected turn. Just a short while later, I found myself in a severe accident after colliding with a bike at an intersection. I found myself hospitalized for 2 weeks due to a fractured bone. On the first day, my husband brought me some essentials. Are you okay? It looks painful. I'll let my mom know, he said. That would be great, thanks, I replied. In my shared hospital room, I couldn't make calls, so I asked my husband to inform his mother that I'd contact her once I was able to move. Sure, I got it, he cheerfully responded before heading home. A week went by, and neither my husband nor my mother-in-law showed up. Despite my expectations, there was no contact from either of them. Concern gnawed at me, but I reassured myself, thinking it was just my husband being his usual forgetful self. Then, I tried calling. My husband didn't answer, which I chalked up to him being busy at work. Next, I rang my mother-in-law. Hi, mother-in-law. You must have heard from Brian, but I'll be in the hospital for another week, so I'll need some fresh clothes, I said. Hospitalized? What happened? An injury? Illness? Her flustered response made me uneasy. As I pondered, I realized she hadn't been informed. But why? If my husband forgot, she would have noticed my absence and called me immediately. Minutes later, she arrived, visibly exhausted. She explained Brian's absence, mentioning a sudden 2-week business trip. Thank you for coming, mother-in-law. What did you hear from Brian? I asked. He said he was going on a business trip for 2 weeks. It was sudden, she replied. That's when it hit me. Brian, an illustrator who preferred working from home, planned a sudden business trip. It didn't add up. Unless something significant arose, he wouldn't leave, even for local meetings. My mind raced with possibilities, including the unsettling thought that he might be cheating on me. I know for a fact that our company doesn't arrange meetings requiring business trips. How? Well, it's simple. I work there too, as an administrative staff member. Are you okay? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? My mother-in-law asked, concern etched on her face. Our company wouldn't send Brian on a business trip. That's the job of the sales team. I'm an admin, so I don't go on business trips either, I explained, watching her reaction. Her puzzled expression spoke volumes. In other words, Brian lied. It had been a week since his unexplained absence and there was no official notification. I couldn't help but wonder where he really was. He left his injured wife in the hospital and lied to me. Did Brian tell you where he was going on business? I inquired. Come to think of it, he mentioned staying in a hotel in Miami arranged by the company, my mother-in-law replied, pulling up the hotel's website on her smartphone. As I glanced at the screen, my heart sank. It was the same hotel where we celebrated our wedding anniversary, a place far too extravagant for a company-funded trip. A throbbing headache began to surface, fueled by the realization of Brian's sloppy alibi. Mother-in-law, this is difficult to say, but Brian might be cheating, I confessed. What? Brian? Her disbelief echoed in the room. But this does seem suspicious, she conceded, her expression shifting. Isn't this the hotel? Hold on, let's confirm if he's really there, she suggested, disappearing for a moment. After what felt like an eternity, she returned, a smirk playing on her lips. They said they'll check it out for me first. We need to verify the facts, she announced. As we waited, about 10 anxious minutes passed by. When I received a call from my mother-in-law, the news was shocking. Brian, my husband, seemed to be spending the night at that hotel, and with another woman, no less. Despite the strict policies against such actions, the circumstances seemed to warrant an exception, my mother-in-law explained. She even disclosed the name of the woman Brian was with. I was taken aback when I heard the name. I knew her. She was actually a friend of mine, my coworker and friend Jessica, who worked in the same department as Brian. She had even been present at our wedding, delivering a speech. The revelation left my mother-in-law equally astonished. Furious, her face flushed bright red, my mother-in-law was ready to confront Brian then and there. However, I urged caution, suggesting we gather solid evidence first. We decided to hire a private detective. After that, I'm filing for divorce. I can't tolerate a man who cheats with my friend. I plan to seek alimony, so I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause you, mother-in-law, I explained. Don't worry about it. I'll give that idiot son of mine a piece of my mind. How dare he betray such a good wife? When he comes back, he'll get a thrashing, my mother-in-law declared angrily, her words offering me some solace. Feeling somewhat uplifted by her support, I began searching for a private detective. A relative of my mother-in-law recommended a reputable detective agency, and I promptly hired them. When I received the report, I couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that my friend Jessica had been posing as Brian's wife while they were away on location, 3 days before my scheduled discharge from the hospital. I dialed Brian's number, keeping it a secret that my mother-in-law was aware of the situation. How are you feeling? I inquired. I'm sorry, I've been too busy to visit. I'll definitely pick you up on your discharge day. Do you need anything? He responded. No, I'm fine. Sorry for bothering you while you're so busy. Apparently, my recovery is taking longer, so my discharge date has been extended. I'm just calling to let you know. I'm borrowing things like pajamas from the hospital, so no need to worry. Looks like I'll be discharged a week from now, I explained. Sorry for not being able to support you while you're so busy. Oh, could you withdraw money for the hospital bills? I don't have any cash on hand, so could you do it on my discharge day? I requested. I see. That sounds tough. All right, I should be done with my delivery in a week, so I'll go to the bank before picking you up. My mom's been worried too. She's caught a cold and feels bad for not being able to visit you. Brian lied effortlessly. Suppressing a laugh at his fabrications, I replied, Oh, is that so? Please tell mother-in-law to take care. Did you manage to inform the office? Thank you. Did they say anything about allowances? He asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. They did. I'll take care of the procedures. You just rest and recover. Hope you get well soon. All right, thank you. See you in a week then, I replied, ending the call. Already aware of Brian's deception, I had confirmed with the office before his call. Apparently, he had informed them that he was going on a trip and applied for my leave. As a result, my boss inquired about the trip and my well-being. After explaining my situation, my boss decided to visit the hospital immediately. Not only my boss but also the HR department came, revealing that I was entitled to sick leave benefits. It was then revealed that Brian had been out of touch for about a week, and he was also behind on his deadlines. The same was true for his mistress, who they couldn't reach either. This revelation shed light on a situation that had been ongoing for the past 6 months, finally coming to a head, prompting them to come and talk to me. I informed my bosses that I preferred they didn't mention the situation to Brian or his mistress until a week later. After that, they were free to impose any necessary punishment. Following the plan, I was discharged from the hospital. It appeared that Brian had submitted another application for my paid leave. His mother, my mother-in-law, received a call from him, stating that his business trip was extended. Despite my extended hospital stay due to my illness, he was prolonging his vacation with his mistress. It became evident that there was no love left for me, leaving me feeling saddened. Deciding to take my paid leave as initially planned, my boss assured me to take all the time I needed until Brian returned. My mother-in-law and I prepared ourselves to confront him. The day before I intended to inform Brian about my discharge from the hospital, I called him. Hello, how's your mother doing? I inquired. I'm feeling good and I got discharged today. It was sudden, so don't worry about picking me up. I can pay with my credit card, he replied. You're working today, right, Brian? I pressed. Yeah, I have a meeting soon and another one tonight, so I won't be home until late. Sorry, he said. That's fine, don't worry about it. I'll take a taxi home, I assured him. Suppressing a laugh at the background noise of a shopping center announcement during his call, I calmly hung up the phone and activated the voice recorder. I had received word from the detective that Brian planned to go shopping today, so I deliberately called him during that time. Upon checking the voice recorder, Brian's voice and the background announcement were distinctly captured. Apparently, Brian had contacted my mother-in-law, claiming he was on vacation with a friend. He insisted it was a working vacation, a sort of half-truth, and mentioned I had given my approval, omitting the details of my hospitalizations to spare her worry. Brian's absurd excuses left me chuckling. According to the detective, Brian had boarded a late-night flight back. My mother-in-law and I laid out all the evidence, awaiting Brian's return. However, Brian called me with a different story. Sorry, the meeting ran late and I missed the last train. I'll be back on the first train tomorrow, he said. Is that so? That's tough. Got it. Sorry, I can't pick you up, I replied calmly before ending the call. After indulging in a 3-week affair trip, it seemed Brian still couldn't get enough. My mother-in-law was furious, but I found that my love for Brian had vanished entirely, allowing me to maintain composure during our discussion. The next day, Brian returned home looking exhausted, laden with souvenirs. You went on a trip, I stated flatly. I didn't hear about that, I said, puzzled. Ha, didn't I tell you? Sorry, my bad. I got friendly with a client, and they invited me. Business relationships matter, right? Brian explained casually as he handed me a bag and followed me to the living room. I'm home. Hey, what's up with you, Mom? You look scary, Brian said, grinning as he plopped down onto a chair. He seemed to believe his mother was on his side. However, as soon as he saw the documents laid out on the table, his face drained of color. Sitting next to my mother-in-law, I pointed at a photo. Oh yes, you seem to have had quite the fun on your trip with Jessica, leaving your injured wife for 3 weeks. Were you in a honeymoon mood? I asked pointedly. What? What's this, Carol? Stop fooling around, Brian stammered, his face contorting in disbelief. Unfortunately, it wasn't a joke. I presented evidence from a private detective. You were pretty careless, weren't you? Your dinner conversations were totally bugged. Staying at a hotel run by our relatives, you must have thought you wouldn't get caught. Brian's face turned even more shocked as he looked at his mother for help. Mom, it was a lapse in judgment, he tried to explain. A lapse in judgment that lasted 3 weeks seems a bit too long, don't you think? His mother interjected with a cheerful smile. Brian, who had been hoping for help, was stunned. Here, these are documents for a claim for damages and a divorce application. Fill it out now, I instructed firmly. Damages? Divorce? Carol, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. The one I truly love is you. Can't you forgive me? Let's start over, Brian pleaded. In response, I pressed a button on my phone, and the voices of Brian and Jessica flowed out. It was a conversation recorded by the detective, hinting at a divorce with me and a remarriage with Jessica. Brian's face turned even paler. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I didn't mean it, Brian mumbled, looking desperate. I couldn't care less, really, I replied, handing him the documents and urging him to write. Please forgive me. I can't afford to pay any damages. Well, that's what happens when you splurge like that. Where did all that money come from anyway? I asked pointedly. Brian mumbled something incoherent, and I had a bad feeling about it. You didn't by chance use the living expenses, did you? I have been giving you money to pass on to mother-in-law. Did you? You've been passing it on to her, right? I asked Brian, expecting confirmation. However, the response I got wasn't from Brian, but from mother-in-law herself. Living expenses? What are you talking about? I've never received anything like that, she said, seeming genuinely unaware. Confused, I turned to Brian. Hey, what's going on here? Explain it properly, I demanded. Mother-in-law and I confronted Brian, who seemed to shrink under our scrutiny. I'm sorry, the living expenses, I used them for our dates, he admitted, his voice barely audible. I felt my already icy affection for Brian grow even colder. He had spent the almost $2,000 I had been giving him every month. All of it. I told you that money was for groceries, utilities, and to thank mother-in-law. That money was mine in the first place, I reminded him, my voice tinged with disappointment. I'm sorry, my salary alone wasn't enough. Brian offered weakly, but it was clear what wasn't enough. The designer items Jessica had. Surely, there must have been gifts from Brian. I swiftly raised my hand to reprimand him, but it was stopped by mother-in-law. Brian watched hopefully, still thinking mother-in-law was on his side. You can't, Carol. If you lay a hand, it'll be to your disadvantage, mother-in-law warned before turning to face Brian. Then, with calm and monotone demeanor, mother-in-law delivered her verdict. I've always thought the sillier the child, the cuter. I've spoiled you too much. Even with the bias, you grew up kind, and your father and I were so happy when you got such a good wife. But now, I'm cutting ties with you. Brian, stunned, tried to protest, but Mom, you're joking, right? Mother-in-law slapped away Brian's pleading hand and handed him a document containing a clause renouncing inheritance. Brian widened his eyes in disbelief, muttering, I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you can't believe it. It's all true, mother-in-law stated firmly. Dejected and seemingly out of arguments, Brian signed all the documents presented. Afterwards, mother-in-law kicked Brian out. He had apparently been misusing company entertainment expenses and was claimed for reimbursement by the company. Brian ended up living in an apartment without a bath, forced into a poor lifestyle after paying alimony and facing reimbursement claims. I claimed alimony from his mistress, Jessica, who, as it turned out, was married. Her husband was away on business, so I contacted him through social media and claimed alimony. As a result, Jessica avoided divorce but had to quit her job, forced to live with her husband's family in a rural area without internet connection, where she was made to work from dawn till dusk. Having lost my parents early, I ended up being adopted by mother-in-law. Initially reluctant because of Brian's infidelity, mother-in-law eventually accepted, and we sold the house, buying a new one just for the two of us. I want to take good care of mother-in-law until the end.
My name is Jason Miller. I toil away as a laborer in a modest factory, lacking any noteworthy qualifications. Straight out of high school, I plunged into the workforce, compelled by financial constraints that rendered quitting an unattainable luxury. Despite the meager earnings, I trudged on, my wallet now holding only a lone $100 bill, scarcely sufficient for mid-month expenses. With around $500 resting in the bank, I reckoned I'd scrape by somehow. In the midst of my musings, a forlorn figure caught my attention. A disheveled girl clad in a high school uniform not familiar to our locale stood before me. Despite the chill in the air, she wore no coat, her knees marred by scrapes, and her attire in disarray. What's troubling her? My curiosity piqued. I halted my stride to observe her plight. Shouldn't she be heading home? Seated there at this hour, perhaps she's taken ill. Her attempts to warm her freezing fingers by rubbing them together did not escape my notice. Leaving her be risks her getting caught up in trouble. What's the best course here? Resolving to act, I ducked into a nearby cafe, procured some steaming beverages and donuts, and approached her. As I drew near, the girl tensed, a hint of fear flickering across her features. Good evening. No need to fear. I won't harm you. I noticed you seemed cold, and I thought it offers some warmth. Would you like this? I extended a freshly purchased cup of hot lemon tea. She tentatively accepted, pressing the warm cup to her cheek for comfort. Are you hungry? Hunger only worsens the cold. Here, would you care for a donut? Uncertain of her preferences, I selected one at random, wondering if she'd receive it. With a soft thank you, she accepted the offering. Aren't you heading home? She shook her head in response, but offered no explanation. Could she have fled her home, I pondered, wary of delving too deeply into her circumstances. Then, a gust of wind lifted her skirt, revealing a network of painful wounds on her legs. What happened? She hastily concealed her legs, but not before I caught sight of the injuries. Did someone hurt you? Were you attacked? Her demeanor stiffened, reluctant to divulge. All right, no need to talk if you don't wish to, but lingering here puts you at risk. How about heading home? In a barely audible voice, she murmured. No. I was planning to go to my dad's, but it's quite a distance away. Her father's place, so she's staying with her mother now. I couldn't fathom the complexity of her situation, sensing it wouldn't resolve easily. Have you tried calling your dad? Maybe he can come get you. I don't have the number. I don't even have a phone, she replied, surprising me with her lack of a cell phone in this day and age. Do you know the address? Can you show me where it is? I inquired, to which she nodded, producing a small piece of paper bearing an unfamiliar address. Is this where you're supposed to meet him? She confirmed with a nod. It seems quite a distance, it's getting late, I remarked, pulling out my smartphone to search the address. The result revealed Greenwood Group, a construction company. I could jot down the number for you to call tomorrow. This is the contact I found linked to that address. Give it a try, you might reach your dad. It seems he works for a construction company, I suggested optimistically. She brightened at the prospect. Okay, you should stay at a nearby hotel tonight. I'll arrange it for you. Can you manage on your own? She hesitated, admitting her lack of funds. Despite my own financial constraints, I still had a $100 bill tucked away. Perhaps it'll suffice for a night, I mused, reassuring her. Don't worry, I can cover it. A warm bath and a good night's rest will help. You can call your dad in the morning. But I can't repay you, she worriedly protested. Forget about it. Just focus on reuniting with your dad. I reassured her, leading the way to a nearby hotel where breakfast was included for $100. After arranging everything with the hotel staff, including permission for her to make a morning call, I bid her farewell. It felt gratifying to assist her despite my now empty wallet. A few days later, as I returned home, a factory manager summoned me. Smith, you wanted to see me. The summons from the manager marked a first for me in my tenure at the factory. With a nervous air, I stepped into his office. Clad in an expensive suit, a stark contrast to the modest setting of our workplace, he greeted me. It's Jason, right? Yes, sir, Jason Miller, I confirmed, my apprehension mounting. You won't need to come back here, he stated bluntly. I beg your pardon? What's the reason? I stammered, bewildered by this sudden dismissal. It means you're being terminated, he declared, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. I struggled to comprehend. Could you please explain? Have I committed an offense warranting termination? I can't recall any wrongdoing. We can't tolerate troublemakers like you in our establishment, he asserted. What exactly makes me a troublemaker? And are you connected with the mafia? I blurted out, my mind racing with confusion. What? Absolutely not. That's absurd, he denied vehemently. I offered you a job straight out of high school, and now you're implicated with the mafia. That's preposterous. I've never had any dealings with the mafia, nor have they approached me, I protested vehemently. Your protests don't change the fact that the mafia is inquiring about you. As a company, we can't afford such associations, he countered. I was never the company's first choice anyway. The previous owner used to say things like, as long as someone's motivated, even a high school graduate will do, he disclosed. That's news to me. His decision has put me in quite a predicament. Please, I assure you, I have no ties to the mafia, I pleaded desperately. I couldn't care less about your predicament. It's none of my concern, he retorted callously. Why not seek help from the mafia then? They might assist you, he suggested coldly. I swear I have no connections with them. There must be some misunderstanding. Please reconsider, I implored, grasping at any hope of retaining my job. The decision stands. We can't afford social liabilities in our small factory, and don't fabricate such tales next time you seek employment, he admonished sternly. I'm not fabricating anything. I've never associated with such individuals, I protested earnestly. Then were you running with a rough crowd in high school? Is that the kind of company you keep? He interrogated. That's impossible. Please, Mr. Smith, believe me, I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. Enough. Just leave. You'll be compensated for today, he dismissed me coldly. Never darken our doors again. No. There must be some misunderstanding, I persisted, but my words fell on deaf ears. He regarded me with disdain, pointing toward the exit. Is that all you have to say? I heard your side. Now go. I've work to attend to. With a heavy heart, I realized it was the end. In the office, I received a meager envelope, my final paycheck from the company. Were the 15 years of hard work really so inconsequential, reduced to this thin envelope? As I bid farewell to my colleagues, their expressions mirrored my disbelief. Why the sudden departure? It's absurd, they lamented, expressing regret at my forced exit. Yet, despite their sentiments, none dared confront the manager or challenge his decision, fearing they'd meet a similar fate. With a farewell and a wish for their well-being, I departed from the gates of the company I had faithfully served for 15 years. What am I to do now? Fired so abruptly, all I possess is this meager envelope. I must find another job swiftly before it dwindles away, I mused, my gaze fixed upon the ground. Suddenly, a black tire halted before me, prompting me to look up. It was a sleek luxury car obstructing the way. Naturally, I thought, must be some high-ranking individual here for the factory. They ought to hasten their entrance. The driver, clad in gloves, emerged from the vehicle and courteously opened the rear door. Stepping out was a man in an exquisite suit accompanied by a girl. He inquired of her, "Is this the gentleman?" Her nod confirmed it. Recognizing her from our earlier encounter, I exclaimed, "Ah, you're the girl from before. So you've reunited with your father? That's wonderful. I'm truly glad for you." Forgetting my recent misfortunes, I addressed her warmly. She beamed and embraced me. "Thanks to you, my daughter is safely in my arms. I owe you my gratitude." "You're her father?" Excellent news. I was concerned for her but had no means to contact you thereafter. By the way, you're leaving the premises quite early. Any pressing engagements? I inquired, attempting a forced laugh. It wouldn't do to divulge my recent dismissal to someone I'd just met, especially someone likely of high rank, evident from the lavish car and attire. It felt improper to engage with such a figure. "If you're not pressed for time, I'd like to express my appreciation. It's nearly lunchtime. Would you care to join me?" He offered graciously. "Oh no, that's too generous." I couldn't possibly accept gratitude for simply doing what was right, I demurred. "Come now, don't be so modest. Should you have other commitments, I won't insist. But if you're available, please allow me to treat you." "A mere thank you hardly suffices for saving my daughter," he insisted earnestly, a sense of sincerity in his words. Initially, I hesitated, feeling that as a recently dismissed individual, I had no pressing engagements. Besides, job hunting in my current downtrodden state seemed futile. However, considering my circumstances, I relented, saying, "If you insist, then I'll accept your generous offer," and agreed to accompany them. Stepping into the car, I was whisked away to a posh restaurant. "Excuse me, I'm not exactly dressed for this," I remarked, gesturing to my work attire, hardly suitable for such an upscale establishment. Expecting a modest diner at best, I was taken aback by the opulence. Yet the man chuckled heartily, dismissing my concerns with, "Don't worry about it. Clothes don't dine." With his encouragement, I followed him, noting the lack of fuss from the hostess, who greeted me with a smile, indicating he was a regular. The ambience of the private room exuded luxury, albeit making me feel somewhat out of place. Despite my discomfort, as the conversation flowed and drinks were poured, I found myself gradually relaxing. The genuine smiles exchanged between father and daughter, coupled with the sumptuous fare, began to thaw my apprehension. It felt surreal, being amidst such extravagance as a high school graduate. Yet, with each sip and bite, I couldn't help but savor the moment, sensing it might be my first and last taste of such indulgence. Eventually, the man disclosed his identity. "I should have introduced myself earlier, but that's unlike me," he admitted, offering me a business card bearing the name B of Greenwood family. "Oh my," I thought, my mind jumping to conclusions. "I apologize," he interjected swiftly. "No need for apologies." "You're right," I replied, realizing my faux pas. "But you see, even a mafia member is a parent. Thanks to you, I'm reunited with my daughter." "I'm truly grateful," he confessed earnestly. "Oh, it was my pleasure," I replied sincerely, touched by his gratitude. "May I ask something?" "I've been curious about why she was there that day," I inquired. "That's because, you see, her mother and I divorced years ago. Shortly after she remarried, her new husband appeared to be the vice president of a small factory. However, after her passing, his new wife took over the household. Coincidentally, around the same time, the factory's president, who had always been kind to my daughter, also passed away. The vice president then ascended to the presidency. Since then, my daughter has been treated as an inconvenience. Could that be why her legs were injured? I wondered aloud. Yes, precisely. She was injured in places not easily visible, especially on her back. It was dreadful. I can't even begin to imagine the pain she endured. Before her mother's passing, she received an amulet and was instructed that if she ever needed help, she should open it. That was the note left for her. Unfortunately, not jotting down a phone number was an oversight. She was desperately trying to locate me. However, despite her efforts, the distance was too great for a high school student to traverse alone. By the time you found her, her wallet was empty. If it hadn't been for your intervention, she might have succumbed to the cold. That was the situation, he explained. I suspected there must have been extenuating circumstances. As for her mother's new husband, I can't forgive him for subjecting her to such hardship. I swore to seek retribution, he declared. Oh, it doesn't sound quite fitting for someone associated with the mafia to express such sentiments, does it? I remarked. I understand your sentiment. Thank you, he responded. What about you? Leaving work at such an hour, something must have happened, right? He inquired. It may sound peculiar to share this with someone I've just met, particularly someone of your stature, but I was actually terminated from my job just now, I confessed. Fired? Why? He inquired, visibly taken aback. Apparently, I was unjustly accused of having ties to unsavory elements. I have no clue how that came about. This morning, out of nowhere, I was accused and promptly dismissed, I explained. Hold on a moment, he said, beckoning over an executive nearby. After a brief exchange in hushed tones, he turned back to me, visibly perturbed. Idiots, he exclaimed before addressing me directly. I must apologize profusely. It appears that my colleague is at fault here, he said apologetically. Oh, what do you mean? I asked, bewildered by the sudden turn of events. I wanted to express my gratitude, so I had my associates look into your situation. They found out where you were employed but wanted to confirm it firsthand. It seems they mentioned our organization's name during the inquiry, which likely led to the misunderstanding about me being associated with antisocial forces. It was a complete setup, and for that, I sincerely apologize. Allow me to rectify this. I'll speak with your manager tomorrow, clarify the misunderstanding, and ensure everything is resolved, he reassured. No, I'm fine, I replied hesitantly. You shouldn't be fine. You must be facing difficulties, right? He persisted. Well, it wouldn't be truthful to say I'm not troubled. However, returning to work under such management would only repeat the same cycle. I refuse to work under someone who lacks trust in their employees, I asserted. I understand. Do you have another job lined up? He inquired. Unfortunately, no. Truth be told, I have nothing at the moment. If I don't secure something by month's end, I'll be in dire straits. But I'm resolved to stand firm, I confessed. Good for you. In that case, how about I introduce you to a company owned by a friend of mine? They have no connections to the mafia. I believe my friend would appreciate your skills, he proposed. No, thank you. I appreciate the offer and am tempted to accept. However, should I truly consider it? Even if they claim no affiliation with the mafia, can I trust that completely? I pondered aloud. I see. Well, should you ever find yourself in need, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here to assist, he offered with a chuckle. About a month later, finding myself in dire straits, I reached out for his help. Despite numerous job interviews, I remained unemployed. Faced with the prospect of settling for part-time work, he invited me for a drink, ensuring it was on him. It was a humble gesture considering his position, and I accepted, surprised to find such generosity from a mafia member. If it's a bar, you're not asking for much, huh? He quipped. That's not fair. I'm treating you, and you prefer a bar over a fancy restaurant, I retorted. Well, I've never been one for fancy restaurants. They make me feel uneasy. I'm more at ease in a casual bar, I confessed. I see. I suppose I didn't consider that, he conceded. With a beer mug in hand, I replied, I'll take this, thanks, and took a swig. So, have you had any luck finding a job? He inquired. Not yet, unfortunately. Being a high school graduate, it's proving to be quite challenging. I've applied to numerous companies, but no success, I admitted. That's a shame. Say, would you mind assisting me with something? He asked, causing my heart to skip a beat. Being asked for help by someone associated with the mafia didn't bode well in my mind. However, he continued, I understand if you're hesitant, but rest assured, my request is not what you might expect. Even though I'm affiliated with the mafia, not all our endeavors are nefarious. I merely seek justice for my daughter, he divulged. Justice, yes. Over the past month, I've been investigating the individual responsible for my daughter's suffering. It transpired to be the manager of the company you were employed at. He operates as the factory's manager. Unlike his predecessor who wore work attire and engaged with the workforce, this man dons expensive suits and avoids the factory floor entirely. He resides in a luxurious neighborhood over an hour's drive away, which explains his habitual tardiness. Absolutely, a classic example of executive negligence. My daughter practically served as his maid, and it appears she wasn't even adequately nourished. Reduced to tears while eating a single bagel. Unbelievable, isn't it? Yes, unfortunately, it's true. How could he treat my daughter in such a despicable manner? He muttered, frustration evident as he finished his beer. Hence, my desire for retribution for my daughter. But when we talk about revenge, it's not about resorting to anything unlawful. I refuse to risk losing precious time with my daughter by ending up behind bars over a scoundrel like him. So we're approaching this legally. Legally? Yes, hence why I've established a company. What sort of company? It operates within the same industry, but truthfully, it's rather inconsequential. What I'm truly after is seizing control of that company. Seizing control? Yes, precisely. We'll orchestrate a takeover and oust the manager. I possess substantial incriminating evidence against him. He's drowning in personal debt, largely accrued from gambling and the like, and now he's funneling the company's profits to settle his debts. Is that so? Yes, that's precisely why the employees' wages have plummeted. They've seen a significant decline since the passing of the previous manager. That's correct. Our wages took a nosedive following the demise of the previous manager. It's clear now. We were all pawns in his scheme, toiling for his benefit. Hence, my resolve to oust him from the company and transform it into a place where employees are rightfully compensated. What fate awaits the manager once he's ousted? Well, I reckon he'll be in quite a bind. Additionally, it appears his wife married him solely for his wealth. If she discovers he's no longer in power, she'll likely abandon him. Moreover, socially, I'll ensure he's ostracized, making it challenging for him to secure employment elsewhere. You could do that? Well, I am the boss of Greenwood after all. Manipulating such situations comes naturally to me. I understand. I sought your assistance because you too fell victim to his actions. I presumed you might seek retribution as well. Indeed, once the employees learn the truth, they'll likely share our sentiments. Most likely. If things proceed as intended, I aim to expand the factory further, and I envision you as a manager. Me, a manager? That seems far-fetched. Nonsense. In the past, high school graduates ascending to managerial roles wasn't uncommon. If formal education is lacking, one compensates with experience and diligence. Don't you feel capable? If you're confident in me, I'll give it my best shot. Excellent. Then tonight, we'll toast to the future of our new venture. Thus, unexpectedly, I became entwined in the takeover scheme of the factory that had previously let me go. A month later, after thorough investigation, we devised a plan to inflict significant financial harm on the factory through our takeover. Well, Mr. Smith. Long time no see. Oh, we have a prior acquaintance? It's possible you wouldn't recall a former high school graduate employee. Ah, Jason Miller. You were terminated under the mistaken assumption of having ties to the mafia. Well, that's not entirely accurate. No worries. It led me to secure a favorable position at my current company. I harbor no ill will. Instead, I come bearing a lucrative proposal. A proposition? You mean you wish to engage in business with us? Precisely. Your products boast exceptional quality, a fact I can attest to from my years of service here. Hence, I propose a contract valued at $5 million. $5 million? Indeed. I request the delivery of goods totaling that amount within a fortnight. Upon confirmation of delivery, the $5 million will be transferred. That's quite generous. So shall we proceed with this contract? Of course, I said as I placed the contract on the table, urging him to sign without perusing its contents. He was elated by the mention of $5 million and hastily affixed his signature. Foreseeing the manager's lack of attention to detail, I had expected as much. Yet it still amused me to witness the behavior of a company manager. With the contract signed, he spurred the employees into action, driving them relentlessly and demanding they work without respite. Production surged forward, but when it came time for delivery, complications arose. No delivery company would take on the task, likely due to interference from the Greenwood. In desperation, Smith himself sought out carriers, only for a truck from the Greenwood to conveniently appear. Despite loading the goods and dispatching numerous trucks, delays ensued, with vehicles encountering various issues along the journey. Ultimately, the deadline passed without the goods arriving. I promptly contacted Smith and returned to the factory. The goods didn't arrive by the deadline. Our company has incurred significant losses, I informed him. This is a breach of contract, he protested. No, we fulfilled our end of the agreement. It clearly stipulates in the contract that failure to deliver results in a $5 million payment, I countered. That's preposterous. I wasn't aware of such a clause, he retorted. Mr. Smith, whether you were aware or not, it's clearly outlined here. Claiming ignorance won't absolve you of your responsibilities, I asserted. Impossible. My company doesn't possess $5 million. Then it appears we'll have to acquire this factory. This factory, it's clearly stated here. Even if the mishap occurred due to the carrier's fault, your company assumes full liability. You've signed the agreement, haven't you? Hold on, this is outrageous. Without the factory, it will spell disaster. Indeed, it appears so. No longer will anyone be able to settle the personal debts you've accumulated. How did you become aware of that? That's not all. It's likely your wife will depart as well. It seems she wedded you solely for your wealth. You were aware of all this and orchestrated this contract, he accused. It's not just me who harbors resentment towards you. That's why this course of action was taken. Now, the factory belongs to our company. Pack your belongings and depart, I instructed sternly. Unbelievable. With all my debts, he lamented, sinking into despair. Following his expulsion from the factory, he sought solace with his wife, imploring her assistance in clearing his debts. However, accustomed to a life of luxury, she chose to sever ties with the now destitute manager. Slamming divorce papers onto the table, she callously demanded compensation, further plunging him into insurmountable debt, leaving him in a state of profound suffering. Upon reporting the entire ordeal to the boss, he expressed satisfaction and commended my actions. Henceforth, he'll find no employment with any reputable company. He'll come to truly understand the consequences of betrayal. Yes, may he face torment in the depths of hell, I concurred. Presently, you're the manager of this factory. Will you endeavor to expand the company for the benefit of the employees and yourself? My colleague inquired. No, that's not my primary motivation. I didn't undertake this for personal gain. I did it for the sake of my daughter, you, and all the hardworking employees at this factory. It's imperative that we prioritize the happiness of our employees, I clarified. Understood, sir. We'll ensure the employees' well-being, they affirmed. With that result, I resumed my role as the factory's manager, greeted warmly by my former colleagues. Thank you all for remaining steadfast. Together, let's strive to enhance the factory and ensure every employee receives fair compensation. This factory belongs to all of us, I proclaimed during my inaugural address. My colleagues erupted into cheers, welcoming me back wholeheartedly. 3 years ago, Nick tied the knot with Jolie. Frankly, had it not been for her unexpected inheritance of the family business following her father's untimely demise, Nick might never have walked down the aisle with her. Mr. McMillan, once robust and seemingly invincible, succumbed to a sudden stroke, leaving Jolie as his sole heir. Nick, a charming but idle individual accustomed to leeching off women, couldn't help but take notice. Jolie, swayed by Nick's smooth talk and promises, fell under his spell, while Nick saw in her a golden opportunity, his plan. To buy his time until something more lucrative came along. As luck would have it, Jolie's inheritance turned out to be the golden ticket Nick had been waiting for. With her newfound wealth, she became his jackpot. Nick, confident in his ability to manipulate her growing affection, envisioned controlling her fortune for his own gain. Initially, Nick's scheme unfolded smoothly. Jolie, engulfed in grief over her father's passing, leaned on Nick for support, oblivious to his ulterior motives. Nick seized the moment, showering Jolie with care and attention during her time of need, all the while concealing his true intentions. He kept up his facade until they exchanged vows, ensuring there was no turning back. After the funeral, Nick proposed marriage, suggesting they wait until Jolie had mourned her father properly. However, when Jolie questioned the necessity of a prenuptial agreement, Nick's true colors began to emerge. Nick, is this just a business move? Jolie queried, echoing the sentiments of Mr. Chinland, her father's trusted advisor. It's humiliating. "Do you think I'm only after your money?" she protested. Nick, taken aback by her defiance, responded defensively, "Honey, it's merely a precaution. We need it just in case. My godfather insists on it. He's always looked out for me, like a second father." Though Jolie's understanding of financial matters might have been lacking due to her privileged upbringing, she possessed a tenacity that transcended her naivety. When she set her sights on a goal, she pursued it relentlessly. Nick, finding himself backed into a corner, begrudgingly acquiesced to all of Mr. Chin's conditions. While the terms of the marriage contract seemed standard, they effectively stripped Nick of any entitlements. It was abundantly clear that Jolie's inherited business and assets would remain solely hers. Nick had assumed he'd have a share in the dividends and the opportunity to amass new wealth. However, the meticulous contract drawn up by a top-tier lawyer dashed those hopes. Despite this setback, Nick convinced himself that the marriage still held benefits. He saw it as a means to tap into his wife's finances without oversight, building his own capital for the future. He planned to siphon money from their joint budget daily, funneling it into his own accounts. Yet Nick's optimism was misplaced once again. Mr. Chinland, a principled and responsible figure, not only oversaw Jolie's business finances but also controlled her personal wealth. Nick found himself restricted in his personal spending, but he remained hopeful, anticipating how the situation might unfold. His patience was eventually rewarded. Despite their efforts, Jolie struggled to conceive, her desire for motherhood overshadowed by repeated disappointment. Initially attributing it to stress, she eventually sought medical intervention after over a year of failed attempts, uncovering the underlying cause of their struggles. Jolie's symptoms, initially dismissed as mere consequences of her busy lifestyle, were ominous signs that her body was in distress, a warning she had chosen to ignore. Eventually, the grim truth emerged. She was diagnosed with cancer. Over nearly 2 grueling years, she endured treatments and suffering with little to show for it. Throughout this ordeal, Nick's role as a husband was merely nominal. His vested interest lay in Jolie's existence being inconsequential, a fact he failed to conceal adequately. While the topic remained unspoken, Jolie couldn't ignore the whispers of her husband's infidelities with numerous other women. Nick, however, fancied himself a master of deception and manipulation. He believed he could convincingly play the part of the devoted spouse to a dying wife without raising suspicion. He considered himself fortunate, convinced that enduring a little longer would secure his desired outcome. Yet Nick's reprehensible conduct became the subject of condemnation and gossip among nurses, hospital staff, and even Mr. Chinland. The latter was both furious and helpless, unable to comprehend Jolie's insistence on preserving a marriage teetering on the brink. Furthermore, the absence of a will left him deeply concerned, as it meant Nick would automatically inherit everything as Jolie's sole heir. That scoundrel stands to inherit everything, including the fruits of Jolie and her father's hard work. It would render everything they've built futile, Mr. Chinland lamented. The elderly man found himself grappling with the delicate task of broaching a sensitive subject with his goddaughter, who, until just yesterday, had exuded health and vitality but now faced an inevitable decline. With each passing moment, her time grew shorter, measured not in months but in weeks. Meanwhile, Nick's anticipation burned bright, his greedy ambitions unmasked in his eager demeanor. He saw in Jolie's looming demise not just tragedy but opportunity, a chance to rid himself of his ailing wife and secure a substantial windfall. Mr. Chinland silently prayed that he wouldn't have to initiate the discussion about Jolie's will himself. Fortunately, his concerns were unfounded. Jolie took the initiative, revealing a secret plan that left him speechless. Her meticulous plotting, executed with a finesse and ruthlessness he never anticipated, served as a chilling reminder that revenge truly is a dish best served cold. Though Jolie's scheme required little time and effort to devise and execute, it marked the culmination of her earthly journey, allowing her to realize her deepest desires. Sadly, her loved ones did not witness a miraculous recovery. Instead, they bid farewell to Jolie as she passed away, her funeral arrangements meticulously planned and communicated with serene determination, ensuring her final wishes were carried out with precision. The day following the somber farewell ceremony, the notary summoned those named in Jolie's will for its official reading. Nick was taken aback by the unexpected news. He had been convinced that his wife had not taken the precaution of drafting such a document, assuming he would naturally inherit everything, as the law often dictates in such circumstances. Nonetheless, clinging to a glimmer of hope, he reluctantly attended the meeting, accompanied by his new mistress, the stunning Shirley. Upon entering the notary's office, Nick was surprised to find Mr. Chinland and Jolie's friend, Kurt Turgan, in attendance. However, what truly caught him off guard was the sight of Kurt pushing a stroller containing a baby boy. Despite being aware of Kurt's marital status and recent parenthood, Nick's astute instincts quickly pieced together the puzzle, revealing a hidden agenda at play, a realization that left him feeling outwitted. Nevertheless, curiosity compelled Nick to stay and discover the contents of Jolie's will, despite his growing apprehension about its potential humiliation. For what felt like an eternity, silence enveloped the room as each individual occupied their own corner, waiting in tense anticipation. No further attendees arrived, leaving the notary to prolong the preamble, emphasizing the solemnity of the occasion and the honor of carrying out the deceased's final wishes. Even then, Nick could discern from the wicked grin etched on Mr. Chinland's face that the contents of the will were a clandestine affair reserved solely for him. Finally, Nick's name was called. "To my lawful husband Nick, I deny the inheritance," declared the notary, the words ringing with a stark finality. As the brief yet impactful sentence echoed in the room, the notary turned to Nick, prompting him to confirm his understanding of its significance. With a heavy heart and a sense of profound humiliation, Nick could only nod in acquiescence. In that moment, Shirley reached for his hand, ready to defiantly depart, but Nick firmly kept her in place, ignoring her questioning gaze. Though every fiber of his being urged him to flee from the scene of his public disgrace, the drama was far from over, and the invited spectators demanded closure. With a measured pause, the notary continued. "I bequeath all my personal property to my only son, Robert Turgis, until he reaches adulthood. I appoint his father, Kurt Turgan, and Mr. Chinland as guardians and administrators of his estate," announced the notary, dropping a bombshell that reverberated through Nick like a devastating blow to the gut. The revelation of Kurt's paternity shattered Nick's patience, eliciting a shocked cry of disbelief. Yet, aside from Nick and Shirley, the revelation elicited no surprise from the assembled witnesses. "Is the boy Jolie's biological child?" Nick's voice trembled as he gasped for breath, his words punctuated by desperation. "Yes, Robert is the biological son of Jolie and Kurt," Mr. Chinland confirmed, his tone resolute. "She hasn't been pregnant in the last 2 years. It's impossible." Nick grasped at straws, though he knew all too well that modern science had rendered pregnancy unnecessary for parenthood. "The marvels of medical progress never cease to amaze," Mr. Chinland remarked, observing the unfolding scene with a mix of pity and detachment. For Kurt, the memories of 2 years prior flooded back, a chilling reminder of the moment he learned of his best friend's grim prognosis. He marveled at her composure as she calmly discussed her limited time and her unwavering determination to fulfill her maternal longing. "I had my eggs preserved before beginning treatment," she had revealed, her resolve unyielding in the face of adversity. "I was told that I probably wouldn't be able to raise my own child, but I insisted, Kurt. I grew up without a mother, and I know it isn't easy, but I always felt her love and protection." "Does Nick agree to raise the child alone?" Kurt cautiously inquired. "Who would allow him? He would gladly become a guardian and use the baby's money, as he lacks conscience," Jolie replied bitterly. "No, I've already realized that my dear spouse is someone of questionable character, to put it correctly, and his reaction to my diagnosis and prognosis. I don't even want to speak about him. This man isn't worth getting upset about." "And what of the baby?" "That's what I wanted to discuss with you." Jolie hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty for her fearless demeanor. "I don't know how to broach the subject delicately. Maybe there is no delicate way. In short, I would like you to be the father of my child," she exclaimed in a high-pitched voice. "Are you joking? You have a husband." Kurt clearly wasn't prepared for this sudden proposition. "Yes, I do have a husband, and I will have him until the day I die. I've already made that decision, Kurt. Of course, we won't sleep together. It's impossible given my current condition. I can't carry the baby myself. Unfortunately, I have my eggs preserved. Now we need the biological material from the future father. Naturally, I also need a woman to carry and give birth to him, but luckily, such services are available now." Initially dismissing it as absurd, Kurt soon realized that Jolie's plan was meticulously thought out, with every detail carefully considered. She had already undertaken extensive preparatory work, delving into the legal aspects, arranging for services at a reproductive clinic, and even securing a surrogate mother for the future baby. Kurt, I could use the services of a donor for the father for the baby. I really want to leave a piece of myself behind. But when you think about it, who will the baby be with? I've been thinking a lot, but you're the only one I can rely on. I am sure of you, knowing you for so many years. I believe that you will be a great father. I understand that you want to create your own family, get married, and have children naturally. It's logical. But please think about it. Don't answer me right now. For me, after what happened with Nick, it is critical that the father of my child is someone who doesn't prioritize money, someone who won't exploit my assets. I'm not as naive as I was before marriage. Nick taught me a lot. Now I have a lot of life experience. As for you, you don't need any money at all. You have plenty. My father has the money, Kurt interjected, correcting Jolie's line of reasoning for the first time. You know you're going to get it. You worked tirelessly to keep the family company thriving. You've never been needy. Now I know for a fact that a man who grew up poor will never stop thinking about having enough to eat. And if his decency is also lacking, there will be a big problem. I have experienced that firsthand, Jolie sadly added. To be honest, I'm completely confused. I had an entirely different idea of becoming a father. I need to consult my parents, understand that I can't make such a decision alone. I will need the help of close family members when I become a father, so I have to inform them and ask for their opinion. Jolie had no objections, but she requested that Kurt promise to keep their arrangement a secret. The conversation with Kurt's parents proved challenging. His father remained neutral, accepting the situation and promising to support his son's decision and assist with his grandchild as much as possible. His mother, however, struggled with the idea. Like any mother, she wished for her son to marry and have children with a good woman. While she held Jolie in high regard and felt immense sympathy for her, the thought of her potential grandchild being born to another woman, especially with Jolie's illness, was difficult for her to accept. Could the child inherit the disease, she asked, the question lingering uncomfortably in the air. Though hesitant to broach such a sensitive topic, she couldn't ignore the potential risks to her grandchild's health. Jolie does not have a hereditary form of the disease, Kurt reassured her, alleviating some of her anxiety, though not entirely. After careful consideration, she expressed her support for her son's decision, albeit with lingering concerns. Kurt himself grappled with uncertainty. Jolie's proposal had caught him off guard, but after much contemplation, he found no reason to refuse. When he conveyed his approval to Jolie, she was overjoyed, and they began to execute her plan methodically. As Kurt reflected on the profound changes unfolding in his life, Mr. Chinlin reminisced about his conversation with Jolie just over 2 months prior. Beginning with expressions of her respect and admiration for him as a father figure, she eventually revealed her request for him to become her son's guardian. Initially dismissing it as delirium, Mr. Chinlin was left in shock as Jolie detailed the entirety of her plan. Not only had she and Kurt made a bold decision, but they had also managed to keep it hidden for so long. How old is the baby now? Mr. Chinlin inquired. Robert is 8 months old. Jolie beamed. You both truly know how to surprise, Mr. Chinlin remarked, still reeling from the shock. I don't want Nick to find out about the child until after I'm gone. He'll only learn of it when my will is read. It's already been drawn up, and is in the hands of the notary. However, there's one aspect we still need to address. Robert will only have one legal guardian. Upon reevaluating many aspects of my life, I've decided not to leave anything to chance. Kurt has parents, so if anything were to happen to him, Robert would go to them. But I want you to have legal rights as well, just in case. With his keen understanding of people, the elderly man recognized the potential danger in confronting Nick directly, even though Jolie's husband undoubtedly deserved such treatment. In the hushed atmosphere of the notary's office, everyone was lost in their own thoughts. It was clear to see that Nick was cursing Jolie in every possible manner. People like him often fail to grasp that their own actions may have provoked such responses. Introspection of that kind is often too complex for individuals like him. Why bother looking for faults within oneself? Strangely enough, it was Shirley who broke the silence. She attempted to guide her lover out by the elbow, but Nick had no intention of leaving, feeling compelled to voice his grievances. Are you certain I'm entitled to nothing? No obligatory share or whatever it's called? I am her husband after all. Nick's voice rose in protest. As per the will, you're not listed among the beneficiaries entitled to an obligatory share of the inheritance. Furthermore, I've meticulously reviewed your marriage contract. Its contents are enclosed here." The notary indicated the hefty folder before him with a firm tap. "You have slim chances even with a legal challenge, though you naturally retain the right to pursue such action." "I'll contest it. Who is this illegitimate child anyway? And who's to say he's really her son?" Nick's outburst escalated, oblivious to the weight of his words. Kurt struggled to contain his anger, fighting the urge to strike the arrogant man. Even the typically composed Mr. Chinlin flushed with indignation. Only the notary remained as composed as ever, treating the situation as just another day at the office, unfazed by the drama unfolding before him. "Can I see?" Nick demanded to examine the evidence. "No. You're only entitled to review the portion relevant to you. All other documents, particularly those concerning the child, can only be disclosed with the parent's consent." Naturally, the notary clarified. "I do not consent," Kurt interjected firmly. "So, access to those documents would only be possible through a court proceeding if the court deems it necessary to request them." That was the breaking point. Nick stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him, determined not to let the matter rest. His mistress, however, bid farewell politely and exited quietly, closing the door behind her. "Does it matter that he didn't sign the will?" Mr. Chinland inquired of the notary. "There are many like him. It's merely a formality," the notary reassured him. "It's almost comical if it weren't so tragic. I still can't fathom how Jolie got mixed up with him." Mr. Chinland mused aloud, his thoughts lingering in the air as a rhetorical question. With the required paperwork swiftly signed and hands shaken, Mr. Chinland assisted Kurt in settling little Robert into the stroller. "Would you care to join us? I could use some fresh air, and it's good for the baby," Kurt invited. "Certainly, I'll join you for a while." They walked in silence, the gentle rustle of the stroller wheels providing a soothing backdrop. "Do you think Jolie would approve of how I'm handling everything?" Kurt finally voiced the question that had been weighing on his mind. "I'm certain she would. You're proving to be a remarkable father, and the bond between you and Robert is undeniable," Jolie's godfather reassured him. "Truth be told, there's something that's been nagging at me. You know, I have a feeling Jolie mentioned to you that I had advised against what transpired at the notary's office," Mr. Chinlin brought up. "Are you referring to the whole debacle with the will and Nick finding out about Robert?" Mr. Chinlin nodded in acknowledgement. "Of course," Kurt replied. "I was the one who constantly brought up the conversation about that. I didn't like this idea from the very beginning. He's a nasty type, angry, stupid, and mercenary. Why provoke him? Honestly, I even contemplated telling him when the baby was already born. But Jolie was so adamant about keeping it a secret, I felt I had no right to interfere. I thought perhaps she just didn't want to deal with him herself and left these disputes to us. Seeing him today with that woman, shamelessly flaunting it, makes me question whether I made the right decision by not standing my ground." His reaction, the look on his face, it was chilling. Maybe it would have been better to confront him earlier. I believe Jolie didn't want to either. That played a part too, and the desire for revenge. She wanted to get back at him because she loved, regardless of what she claimed later. She loved deeply, and this corrupted love left her no other recourse. "My poor girl," the elderly man wiped away a tear trickling down his cheek. "Don't grieve for her. She asked us not to. She asked us to direct all our love, which was for her, to Robbie," Kurt comforted Jolie's godfather, while the others reminisced. Meanwhile, Nick and Shirley observed from the car, discussing the same topic. "So you won't get anything at all, huh?" the girl asked incredulously, blinking rapidly. "You're such a fool. You heard there's no chance because of this baby. All right, let's go. We need to salvage at least something valuable and move it to my place." 3 days later, Kurt finally gathered the courage to visit Jolie's house, only to find it deserted. He had prepared himself for a confrontation, even hiring 2 security guards for protection. But Nick had anticipated his move and already absconded with plenty of valuables. Now Nick sat alone in the cramped confines of his tiny apartment, nursing a dwindling glass of whiskey that Shirley had left him, a predictable gesture. Why would she need a loser like me? Nick mused, reflecting on how he had ended up in this dismal state. Once, women paid him for his company, but now he found himself offering money to a young, beautiful girl just to keep her around. Ironically, Nick, a gigolo past his prime, withered by his vices, refused to shoulder the blame for his circumstances. In his mind, his wife was the villain who had drained him of vitality and crushed his dreams, leaving him without the inheritance he had so eagerly anticipated. In his fantasies, he was young, handsome, successful, and fabulously wealthy. Yet Shirley's parting words had shattered these illusions. He was nothing more than a destitute drunkard lost in delusions of grandeur. Accepting this reality was a bitter pill to swallow. His grand visions of wealth and success, hinging largely on his ex-wife, crumbled like a house of cards. His aspirations of becoming a successful entrepreneur were dashed. Blinded by his pride, he failed to acknowledge his own role in his downfall. Instead, he directed his resentment towards his late wife, seeing her as the source of all his woes. For nearly 2 weeks, Nick drowned himself in a haze of alcohol, seeking solace from his harsh reality, his bitterness festering with each passing day. Then, one bleak morning, gripped by a pounding hangover, he reached a breaking point. He realized that drowning his sorrows in alcohol wouldn't bring him success or vengeance against Julie. Nick felt a profound sense of humiliation. A few days prior, representatives from Mr. Chinlin had appeared, practically strong-arming Nick into surrendering his car keys and tearing up the power of attorney that Julie had granted him. Did you not realize that the power of attorney loses its legal validity after the death of the grantor? One of the men remarked, his tone dripping with disdain. In Nick's mind, he painted himself as a saint who had never left his ailing wife's side. Conveniently, he brushed aside his own endless scheming, gambling habits, alcohol abuse, and dismissive treatment of his wife. How unfortunate that she's dead and I can't lash out at her, he had thought countless times. I barely suppressed my urge, convincing myself that my patience would be richly rewarded. Now, as he contemplated his next move, thoughts of revenge consumed him. Initially, he had entertained the idea of desecrating her grave. But upon reflection, considering what was most precious to Jolie and what would inflict the deepest anguish, he stumbled upon another answer. Robert. A surge of electricity coursed through Nick as this idea took hold in his mind. He chuckled maliciously, finally concocting his revenge plot. While many details needed ironing out, he had settled on one crucial point: he would not harm Robert. What's a mother's worst nightmare? Not being able to protect her child in times of trouble. That's precisely the fate he planned for. His imagination was ablaze with a simple yet sinister plan: to abduct the baby, whisk him away to a distant location, and abandon him at an orphanage. After a week of dwelling on thoughts of revenge, Nick found solace and satisfaction in his fantasies, if one could call them that. He hadn't smiled like this in ages. Granted, the grimace he wore might have been unsettling to some, but Jolie's husband cared little for appearances. In fact, you could say he was elated as he meticulously plotted every detail. He reveled in a sense of euphoria. Although his target was out of sight, Nick savored the mental image of Jolie's anguish at her inability to protect her child. Once he had outlined his plan in theory, Nick shifted his focus to practicalities. He needed to gather intelligence on Robert's movements and the people he encountered outside the house to pinpoint the perfect time and place for his crime. Having known Kurt well in the past, and even having visited his parents' house, Nick was aware of their affluent suburban community and its heightened security. As he delved deeper into his scheme, he became acutely aware of the obstacles he would face. He couldn't predict how long he'd spend surveilling from the cover of the forest, peering through binoculars, studying the child's routines and activities. Was the risk worth the reward? Without a doubt, Nick reasoned with himself. His mental state had deteriorated significantly since the reading of the will. She destroyed my life, and I'll destroy her child's, he muttered maliciously. In his twisted fantasies, Nick envisioned himself as a wealthy heir living off the state's provisions, while his deceased mother looked on from the afterlife, bearing the weight of blame for his misdeeds. His laughter echoed with malice, a chilling sound that would have alarmed any bystander with a shred of empathy. But history does not entertain what-ifs, and Nick was left unchecked in his pursuit of his dark ambitions. Once he set his mind on a goal, no matter how sinister, he pursued it relentlessly to its conclusion. For 2 full days, Nick didn't just watch but meticulously prepared the groundwork for his scheme. He scoured the entire area, seeking the perfect vantage point that would afford him an unobstructed view of the settlement, particularly the Turgis household, while keeping him concealed. He poured all his energy and time into finding the ideal spot, ensuring it met his stringent criteria. Day after day, he rose with the dawn, immersing himself in surveillance at the cottage settlement until nightfall. With binoculars in hand, he meticulously documented every movement, noting arrivals and departures with unwavering diligence. Through his observations, Nick learned that the child was under the care of Kurt's grandmother and a nanny. Both Kurt and his mother were unsuitable targets for Nick's plans. It would recognize him immediately. Nick had no intention of facing consequences for his actions. Anticipating police inquiries, he aimed to deflect suspicion away from himself. Thus, he identified the nanny as the target of his scheme. She followed a predictable schedule, walking with Robert along familiar routes at set times. Luck seemed to smile upon Nick when, on a Wednesday, the nanny ventured beyond the settlement's secured confines for a daytime stroll with the sleeping baby. She followed a forest path to a clearing where she met another nanny from a neighboring settlement, her laughter carrying through the air. Recognizing an opportunity, Nick decided to limit his visits to the settlement to Wednesdays, minimizing the risk of drawing attention to himself. His plan was meticulous, akin to a well-oiled machine. Each Wednesday, like clockwork, the nanny ventured into the forest. For 4 consecutive weeks, Nick observed this routine, ensuring its consistency. As the 4th Wednesday approached, he knew the time had come to execute his sinister plan, confident in its precision and success. He acquired a potent stun gun from a local market, exchanging cash to evade detection. Every aspect of his plan was meticulously arranged to minimize the risk of capture. Securing an old car, he appropriated license plates, ensuring they were affixed inconspicuously. He strategically positioned the vehicle for a swift getaway, yet far enough to evade suspicion. Disguising his appearance was paramount, taking precautions to obscure his features and physique to evade identification. Obsessed with thoughts of kidnapping, he became consumed by them, even dreaming of the deed in vivid detail. As the fateful day drew near, he shed nearly 7 kilograms, a physical manifestation of his preoccupation. A haunting aura of neurosis and fixation began to manifest in his countenance, a visible testament to his unraveling psyche. On the appointed Wednesday, he parked in his chosen spot, his nerves taut with anticipation. As he spied the nanny guiding the stroller down the path, a tremor of apprehension coursed through him. The meticulous planning had insulated him from the grim reality of his impending actions. He was poised to confront a stranger, to assault her with a stun gun, and to wrest the child from the safety of the stroller, all in a desperate bid to enact his vengeful scheme. Reality shattered his preconceived notions, starkly contrasting the simulated scenarios of his imagination. Here, everything was palpably real. The unsuspecting woman, the innocent child nestled in the stroller, his gaze filled with innocent wonder. Nick was not inherently predisposed to violence, but his festering animosity towards Jolie propelled him across the threshold of moral restraint. Approaching the nanny, he forcefully pushed her away from the stroller, causing her to stumble and fall. He then unleashed the taser's jolt upon her, rendering her unconscious with a single shock. With trembling hands, he moved to extract the child from the confines of the stroller, his heart racing with adrenaline-fueled urgency. Yet his meticulously crafted scheme was abruptly derailed. As he leaned down to undo the child's restraints, a sudden blow struck his head, sending him reeling to the ground in a dizzying haze of confusion. The next thing Nick knew, he found himself subdued by an elderly man standing over him, scolding Nick while deftly binding his hands. Nick's consciousness slipped away once more. It turned out that the mysterious figure was none other than Mr. Mayo, a respected gamekeeper renowned in the nearby elite communities. His guardhouse, nestled inconspicuously amidst dense foliage, overlooked a clearing frequented by nannies from neighboring settlements, unbeknownst to Nick on that fateful day. Mr. Mayo had been returning from a local errand when he caught sight of suspicious activity. "I spotted someone, cloaked in black despite the morning heat, stationed as a lookout. I decided to observe and investigate," he recounted later to the police. With years of experience navigating the forest, Mr. Mayo adeptly maneuvered without disturbing the wildlife. "I concealed myself behind a tree, keeping vigilant watch. Suddenly, I witnessed a man assaulting a woman, knocking her to the ground. Initially, I feared for her safety, but it became clear he was targeting the child. Acting swiftly, I intervened, striking him with a makeshift cudgel I had prepared," Mr. Mayo elaborated. "Exceptional work, Mr. Mayo. You've become a local hero. The press is eager to speak with you," remarked one of the officers. "No, I prefer to stay out of the limelight. That's not my style," Mr. Mayo declined, quietly retreating to his abode via a circuitous route to evade pursuit. He considered his actions nothing out of the ordinary, believing anyone would have done the same in his position. How could I stand by when those in need of protection were in harm's way, he reflected. A few hours later, Kurt arrived at Mr. Mayo's house, gratitude pouring from his words. I'm the father of the boy you saved today. He's a resilient kid. Once I held him, he settled right down. Such bravery and intelligence in those eyes. We're deeply thankful you were there when it mattered. We can't express our gratitude enough, Kurt expressed, his voice laden with emotion after a tumultuous day. Is there any way I can repay you? Kurt inquired earnestly. Mr. Mayo waved off the notion with a humble smile. No need for thanks. When a child's safety is at stake, there's no hesitation, he replied, genuinely touched by Kurt's appreciation. Yet Kurt persisted, wanting to show his gratitude. If you insist, perhaps a new hunting suit and some provisions for my dog? Consider it done. But may I ask, was your intervention motivated by money? Mr. Mayo's curiosity prompted him to pose the question. Oh, sadly, it's much more complicated than that, Kurt replied, his voice tinged with regret. Mr. Mayo listened attentively, prompting Kurt to share further details of their tumultuous past. As Kurt recounted the series of events, from Jolie's illness to her unconventional parenting decision and subsequent passing, Mr. Mayo nodded in understanding. I live somewhat isolated here, so to speak, and rarely hear such tales, he remarked. Kurt elaborated on Nick's motivations, highlighting the investigators' insight that Nick's actions were driven not solely by greed, but by a deep-seated desire for revenge. He was consumed by it, Kurt explained. Relieved to share the complexities of the situation with an impartial listener, Kurt pondered aloud, questioning if their actions had driven Nick to the brink of madness and revenge. If it were just about himself, I wouldn't suffer such reflexivity. But everything he and Jolie did ultimately revolved around their son, Kurt reflected. Turning to Mr. Mayo for his perspective, Kurt asked, do you think we played a role in pushing him to this point? Are we responsible for his desire for revenge? Are you serious? You're an adult, and you're talking such nonsense. Mr. Mayo's blunt truth hit Kurt hard, offering a fresh perspective on Nick's actions. That Nick of yours always found a reason. He doesn't even need one. He married for money, cheated shamelessly, mistreated his sick wife, and convinced himself it was all her fault. What's her fault? For retaliating once? For losing patience? For not enduring it? Mr. Mayo's words resonated deeply with Kurt, prompting him to reflect on the situation. Grateful for the insight, Kurt smiled in response. Now, I also owe you for your good advice, he acknowledged. The gamekeeper waved his hand dismissively. They parted as friends, with Mr. Mayo promising to look after Robert. I heard somewhere that the Chinese have this belief or wisdom, God knows what to call it, that if you save someone's life, you're responsible for that person forever. So don't worry about your Robert. I'll look after him here too, Mr. Mayo assured Kurt. True to his word, Mr. Mayo became a regular presence in Kurt's household, providing support and love to Robert. Meanwhile, Nick was sentenced to several years of imprisonment, bringing a sense of relief to Kurt's family. Life gradually returned to normal, with Mr. Chinlin continuing to fulfill his duties as Robert's guardian. Kurt found companionship in a single mother whose daughter attended the same kindergarten as Robert. Their children quickly became friends, sparking hope in Kurt's parents for his personal happiness. Despite moving forward, Kurt remained dedicated to honoring Jolie's memory. He regularly spoke to Robert about his mother, sharing photos and videos to ensure her presence was never forgotten. He reassured the boy that his mother's love would always surround him.